Hey there. Tonight I'd like to talk about a spread that I've developed and that I find particularly useful. I'm going to preface this by saying that this isn't the first time that I've tried recording this, and every time I do, I end up coming off as incredibly didactic, so please forgive that particular slant. I will do my best to sound more relaxed and less like I'm recording a safety video for an airline. So the spread was developed with a very particular goal in mind, and that was to engage the querent more actively in the tarot spread. This spread was developed in response to a tendency that I think is pretty typical of most tarot spreads, and that's that they are by and large pretty passive. While receiving a tarot reading, most querents aren't necessarily deeply engaged. So this isn't surprising if you're dealing with a querent who doesn't have any personal experience with the cards from a reader standpoint. But even if you have a querent who's a reader themselves, there's a reason they're seeking input from somebody else. Perhaps they feel like they can't be objective about whatever issue that they're interested in exploring via tarot, or they may feel like their intuition isn't firing on all cylinders and they're looking for new and novel interpretations for various cards. They might feel like they continually get the same answers. There's a difference between being engaged with the cards and being engaged with the issue. So although an inexperienced reader may hold back because they don't feel competent to engage in interpretation, a querent who does read tarot may find themselves holding back from engaging because they don't want to run over the person that they've asked to interpret for them. And so in holding back from engaging with interpretation and the cards in that sense, they may find themselves blocked from engaging with the issues. Now that's not to say that they cannot be engaged. A good tarot reader is going to be able to pull out a querent. They're going to be able to engage them through probing questions. Perhaps after the cards have been explained, the reader will say, how does this apply to your life? But they're still fundamentally passive in that there's very little active decision-making being made on the part of the querent. So really the point of this spread was to force interaction on the part of the querent by forcing choice. Incidentally, that's the term I used for this. I think of it as a forced choice spread, which means that in order to progress through the spread, the querent has to choose between two mutually exclusive options. The reason I think this can be really beneficial is that we will all over the course of our lives face issues, questions to which there are no right answers, questions that we have a great deal of difficulty navigating and that essentially paralyze us. And really a lot of those questions are exactly the sort that we seek tarot consultations for. But by forcing choice over the course of the spread, we're actually forcing engagement with that topic itself. But we're doing so in a way that's just a little bit less threatening than having to make those decisions in real life. Having said that, being forced to make those decisions on the fly sort of raises the stakes of the spread. If you have to make decisions in order to see where the read goes, that increases risk. It adds a little bit of threat. There's now something riding on the decisions being made in the moment, because we hate not knowing what's behind door number 2. And this entire spread is really designed to tap into that. It's like the $5 buy-in at poker night. It's not that anyone around the table will necessarily notice the loss of $5, but it engages them in the game in a way that otherwise they wouldn't be. So now I'm just going to walk you through the spread itself. So I call this the Crossroads spread, and it begins typically enough. You shuffle the deck, you put it down, you flip over the top card. So this card can be very general. It can represent the querent themselves or an issue they're facing in their life. Either way, conflict is built into this card because our lives are all about competing options. And as probably the vast majority of people watching know, there are no wholly positive or negative or simple cards in the tarot. All of them are complex enough that they encapsulate all sorts of conflicts, all sorts of conditions. So this first card that gets turned over represents just that. It represents a moment where a fundamental decision has to be made. So at this point, you'll cut the deck into 2 halves. Each half goes on its respective side, and you flip 1 card from each half. These are the 2 options. This is the choice that is being forced. So from this primary card, you have two potential paths. Now at this point, I like to reinterpret the primary card in light of those secondary cards, those options. The two options don't have to be in direct opposition to one another, by the way. They can be very subtle changes in the way one envisions or perceives or engages with whatever the central issue is. But the point is, these are two ways of reacting to the situation, two choices to be made. They can also provide two solutions. So here's where forced choice comes into it. The way in which the spread progresses will depend on which of those two options the querent chooses. If they pursue the right-hand option, the left-hand path gets tapped, or turned sideways if you don't play Magic the Gathering, and all future card draws come from that right-hand path. So on the right-hand side, you can now turn over another card that presents another complication, another consideration that emerges from having taken that path. As with most spreads, you can always add more cards. So at this point, you can draw more cards in order to get a deeper sense of what's going on at that particular intersection, but eventually you're going to hit another crossroad. So the next step, the next formalized step in the spread, is to cut the remainder of the cards that are already on the right-hand side and flip over the next two options, which will determine, once again, the two options that the querent can follow in order to progress down the spread. And once again, it's a forced choice. They must pick one of those two options in order to continue reading. And the reading basically progresses in this fashion until there are no more cards left, there are no more forks. Now, once again, as with that initial card, each of these forks can be a natural progression, sort of choice, repercussion, or each of these forks can represent a different aspect of that initial decision. So for example, with an initial fork in the road representing a professional decision that needs to be made, the next fork in the road may represent personal repercussions or how this alters one's trajectory in one's spirituality or in one's freedom of movement. There are essentially limitless options, and you can determine as you move forward which of those things is most appropriate for the particular querent for the particular situation. Which is to say that every fork in the road can just be a different way to examine the same central issue. So although there is essentially limitless opportunity to personalize this sort of spread, the key component is really the forced choice. It's the active decision-making over the course of the read that determines what cards get pulled when. To give you an idea of how this works in practice, let me go back to this example of a querent who is having professional issues and is seeking guidance on that score. So this first card, the Three of Cups, may represent issues with cliquishness, the possibility that the querent doesn't feel like they're part of the team, doesn't feel like they occupy the same position, feels unequal versus their co-workers. Thus, the first fork in the road really represents two possible interpretations, two possible options with regards to how you can deal with this. On the left, we'd turned over the Four of Cups. So in this case, I might suggest the possibility that the issue is really one of perception rather than reality. Perhaps the querent has failed to recognize opportunities to become more involved with the group, to build those relationships. Opportunities proffered may not have been seized, they may not have been noticed. And in fact, this lack of acknowledgement on the part of the querent has essentially formed a feedback loop where eventually coworkers, potential friends who reach out and are repeatedly denied will stop trying. On the right-hand side, we had the Three of Coins, the Three of Pentacles. So this may represent another possibility, another potential solution. And in this case, one possible interpretation is that the querent was hired for a reason. Presumably the querent has particular skills that they may be able to leverage in order to start to build a foundation of respect and collegiate feeling. Perhaps the answer could be something like looking for opportunities in which the querent knows that their particular technical skill set can really contribute to teamwork and thereby demonstrate their capacity to contribute. And in so doing, likely win greater respect, greater attention from the people that they work with. So at this point, we pulled another couple of cards in order to expand upon that. And those cards were the Six of Wands and the Devil. Here you could interpret these modifiers as perhaps being a warning that, yes, this approach would in fact raise your esteem in the eyes of your coworkers, but ultimately you're going to feel shackled to the image that you've created. You may find yourself limiting your responses in order to carefully maintain that esteem that you gained, even though you don't necessarily feel like that image you've built for yourself is one that you feel comfortable wearing from day to day. By changing their relationship with their colleagues, the querent has now embroiled themselves in other complications that they hadn't foreseen. So again, the next fork in the road. There was the Fool, and perhaps that was rejected. They went with the King of Pentacles, opting instead to use this initial opportunity to demonstrate their specialized knowledge to, yes, raise the respect of their peers, but also chose to be careful to ensure that they didn't become ensnared in those group dynamics by joining a clique that perhaps they don't actually want to be a part of, and instead began to build an identity that is set apart, a respected colleague who is liked but who isn't really one of the in-group. Alternately, like I said, the secondary fork may represent repercussions of that first decision to family life, let's say. And in that case, the King of Pentacles may reflect the querent feeling more grounded now in their identity, more confident, less prone to having the trials of work spill over at home and thereby taint those other relationships. In any event, this spread can continue until you run out of cards, and lest you be worried that that would go on forever, you actually get fewer cuts of the deck than you would expect. So it's not a recipe for never-ending tarot, although how many of us would really mind? I hope you found this interesting and useful. I would love to hear your results if you try this for yourself or for somebody else. Please feel free to share your experiences, to give me your perceptions of how this has worked for you, and any other recommendations, advice, spread that engages querents in a way that is atypical for tarot spreads. So I hope you have a fantastic night and that I haven't droned you to sleep with my airplane safety voice, which I've worked really hard to avoid, by the way. And I look forward to talking to you again. Take care.